Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Liz Live. Are you ready to be uplifted? I hope so, because tonight we're gonna talk about trauma bonds and relationships, and we want to do it in such a way that is uplifting. And sometimes to be uplifted, we have to go through and talk about some of the not so pleasant stuff in order to clean it and clear it out and really get what you want in your relationships. So this week we've been talking about trauma bonding. So if you've been following my YouTube channel or my Instagram or Facebook, you would know that this week I decided to stick with that theme because it's something that I think is so common, is incredibly important, and people don't really have a good understanding or idea of what a trauma bond actually is. And the internet and different things I've looked at just missed the whole thing. They missed the whole important part of it. So I'm going to explain trauma bonding and we're going to get into it. So if you're here tonight and you're watching the show, chances are something appealed to you about relationships, that either something's going on in your relationship or something that I said in my clips really resonated with you. And when we're talking about a trauma bond, you can start understanding it because it's just like it sounds. We are bonded together via our trauma. So when you're feeling like your relationship is just a continuous cycle of makeup, breakup, makeup, breakup, makeup, breakup, and my dog's pushing things on the floor because she needs my attention at all times. If you have a dynamic of making up and breaking up over and over and over again, that would be a good sign that you probably have a trauma bonded relationship. So when two people come together and they both have traumas that are what I'm going to call unresolved, and they come together, it's going to be very hard to have a healthy relationship dynamic. Many of us are, I would say almost everyone has been traumatized at some point in their life. Hello. Everyone, and if you guys have any questions, I will definitely be hitting the screen and answering any specific questions you have about your relationships or questions about trauma bonding. So I will get to all of you, I promise. So when we have trauma, I first want to just give you a Reader's Digest version of what trauma actually is, because it's all relative. And if you don't really understand how trauma impacts the body, you're not going to understand what a trauma bond is. So we all use the word in our pub. Oh my God, I'm traumatized. That was so traumatizing. But what does that really mean? And what that actually means is that your emotional system is witnessing something, has witnessed something, or is experiencing something personally that is so awful and so terrorizing that it puts your body into a state of shock, and it overwhelms your emotional system in your brain, your typical emotional, I always call it emotional digestion. It cuts it off. Your brain can't absorb all the emotions at one time. So it stores these memories of this horrific events or events in the back of your brain, in a part of the brain called the amygdala. The name of the part of the brain is not important. What's important is that you understand that trauma is like food that cannot be digested by the digestive system. So if you think about Thanksgiving or Christmas and you eat so much more food and calories than you normally would, that your stomach can't digest it all and it gets sick, right? That's what trauma is to the brain. So I want you to understand that trauma can be anything because it's all relative to our life experience. So for example, somebody who's in a car accident where no one got hurt might be able to walk away from that car accident and not think about it. It's no big deal. Where another person could be in that same car accident and they would be totally flipped out and they would be traumatized, where they were so terrified that their brain could not process how fearful they were. So we kind of have to keep in mind that trauma itself is sort of relative to a lot of things, to what you're used to what your upbringing was like, so on and so forth. So we all experience trauma at some point in our lives. Could be a lot, could be continuously throughout childhood, it could be once. And I would say that unless you're really freaking lucky, and you never had any trauma, which I think is almost impossible, you would still have something that hurt you so deeply that it stuck with you. So when we're carrying these different traumas, especially into our adulthood, and we've never gone to therapy and we've never resolved these traumas, the trauma literally sits in our emotional system. And when anything that seems remotely familiar to the traumatic event happens, you're going to have a reaction to it. So for example, if your parents fought all the time and they were screaming and arguing all the time and it scared you as a child and it traumatized you, when you hear people arguing, even if it's in a show or a movie or on TV, you might have a reaction to it. I've actually seen it where you go, oh, I can't stand to look at that. And because it triggers something in you that you don't want to remember, that you don't want to feel. So if you figure that most of us carry a lot of these unresolved traumas with us, and then we meet people that we want to date or be in a romantic relationship with, and they also have their traumas from whatever went on in their life, your relationship dynamic and the pattern between the two of you is going to start to be based on a very consistent, unhealthy pattern that is consistent with your trauma. So for example, let's say there was a lot of fighting and screaming in my childhood and a lot of trauma. And I start dating somebody who has an equal amount of trauma. Every time I react to something that might just be regular old Liz, and every time he does something that just might be regular old him, but it reminds us of something traumatic, we're going to start to react, and no one's going to understand each other, and it's going to escalate. And then you start developing a very unhealthy relationship pattern of a lot of fighting, a lot of mistreatment of one or both, a lot of outbursts, a lot of making up and breaking up and back together, because in a trauma bonded relationship, nobody ever really feels safe. So in order to try to gain the power and control over the relationship, you're going to sort of up the ante and, I'm going to leave before he leaves, or I'm going to cheat on him or her so that they can't do it to me first. And you're running a relationship based on common trauma, so common themes like abandonment, emotional neglect is a big one. It could be patterns of instability, like for kids that, maybe moved a lot as a child and never made any friends because their parents were moving them around all the time. They may have a lot of instability because they had no roots, and so they're going to connect with someone that's going to have a similar kind of trauma, and here we go. Okay? And I'm not talking about the basic type of relationship issues that we all have. I mean, in any romantic relationship, you're going to have arguments and you're going to fight, you're going to hurt each other. It's the nature of the beast. But in a healthy relationship, you're able to work through that. You're able to sit down and say, okay, I was really hurt when you did da 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 da. And if you have a normal, healthy, caring partner, they're not going to do it again, because they're going to show up for you and they're going to be available to you and they're going to care. So if you tell them that they did something that hurts you, they're not doing it again, right? Or that becomes almost a form of cruelty, if you really think about it, right? So think of a trauma bond as two people coming together that both are carrying unresolved traumatic incidents and patterns from previous relationships, from their upbringing that have never really been addressed. And they start reenacting that fear-based pattern between them. And by the way, guys, this doesn't necessarily just have to be romantic. It can be really any relationship. I mean, I've seen, people like bosses and employees and brothers and sisters and, so on it goes. I mean, it doesn't really matter. But when relationships get close, there's a lot of toxicity that comes with that trauma bond. A lot of people tend to think that a trauma bond means that you go through a trauma together in a relationship and you bond through trauma, and that is not correct. That is not what the actual trauma bonding in the sense of relationships that we're talking about. I've certainly met couples who've experienced trauma together while together in a relationship, but that's not a trauma bond. That might be, you're hanging around someone for a long time because you feel like you have a lot of emotional history together, but that's not the same thing as a trauma bond. Trauma bonding was actually, it's not a traditional psychological term. It's something that the very brilliant Dr. Patrick Carnes, he wrote a book, many books on trauma bonding. And I used to actually stock one of his books in my office because it's so good. So if you feel like you might be dealing with trauma, check out his book that's called The Betrayal Bond. And I can link it in the bio. And in the Betrayal Bond, he walks you through in almost like a workbook-like fashion of all the times that you were traumatized or shamed or humiliated, abandoned, all the awful, traumatizing type of events. You kind of catalog those while you're reading the book. And he really works through and gets you to look at, who was the first person that was unavailable to you. And, when you think about it, he does go all the way back to early childhood, and he continues and he walks you through to your adult relationships. And it's a really awesome book, and it's profound. I read it. God, I got my hands on that book, I want to say almost 30 years ago, 25, 30 years ago. And when I was working with victims of violent crime, and I read that book, and it really did change my life. It's excellent. So it's Patrick Carnes, The Trauma Bond. So he's really the one that came up with the phrase of trauma bond. It didn't exist before he wrote about it. And he has many, many books about trauma bonding. So I'm going to give you some examples that I think will help you relate to really getting what a trauma bond is, okay? So, in fact, you know what? I'll share some stuff from my life. So, when I was 11, my father died. I've talked about that many times on many shows. And the year prior to him getting sick, a year prior to him dying, he was sick in and out of the hospital like constantly. So when I was 9 or 10, my mom was always knocking on my door in the middle of the night and saying, it's okay, but I have to rush daddy to the hospital. And this became a normal part of our life for about a year and a half. And my mother would sort of find anyone in the family that could watch me and my little brother, because she was constantly at the hospital. So for a good period of time, there was, not because my mom had these intentions or wanted it to be like this, but there were times when, because of what was happening in our lives, she was not available to me and my little brother. And we were just sort of passed off to different relatives, and it was all well-meaning. But that was made life extremely unpredictable and extremely anxiety filled and scary for two little kids who previously had a very normal life. So needless to say, did my little brother and I have issues? We did. I know I've cleared up most of mine, but I can't speak for him. But so we did have that instability. And so when I started dating as a young teenager, and I was getting, my first real boyfriends, at 17 or 18, I was gravitating usually to the guys that had a similar background, that had lost a parent, that had a parent that was very ill, that had multiple siblings, that had divorce or something in their background, because it was something we understood that our childhood wasn't a fantasy, and we had a certain maturity because of that. I think because of those things that happened. But that doesn't necessarily make for a great relationship, because you wind up reenacting these feelings of instability in the relationship. And I think that's the clearest way that I could really put it to you, that from that example, that's a very clear, you saw the trauma, the loss, and the unfortunate neglect and the instability from those years of our childhood, and how that would lead us to bonding to really the next best thing that came along, and then obviously relating better to other kids and teenagers who had a similar problem in their childhood, so that we felt safe with each other. Like, I didn't have to explain to my boyfriend, whose father was actually murdered, my first really serious boyfriend. He lost his dad, I lost my dad, and I can't tell you how many guys I dated as a young teenager that had the same thing. And the trauma bond was not because we both had lost a father. The trauma bond was through the emotional trauma, the emotional terror that we needed somehow resolved, and we were looking for love in all the wrong places. So in those relationships, and in any trauma bonded relationship, you're gonna have a lot of drama, a lot of theatrics, a lot of fighting, a lot of on and offing. And a lot of times when you're trauma bonded, you don't really understand what healthy love is. It's just something that it's not even in your wheelhouse, because it's something that you didn't experience. And again, I don't blame my father because he died, or blame my mother because she had to attend to his needs. And she did actually the best job she could. But my point is that when you experience those things in childhood, they make these very traumatic imprints on you that you're going to try to connect and be close to other people, but it's just going to be very difficult because you have never been fully seen or heard or really experienced stability in your life. And so the cycle just goes on and on and on until somebody says, wait a minute, this is not what I want. Something's off here. In trauma bonded relationships, often we take people back who have really shit on us, because we make a lot of excuses for their bad behavior, because the traumatic threat of being alone or being abandoned or being lost or being, I guess blown off emotionally, having someone have no interest in what you're giving them. When you are used to that, and you don't realize what you deserve, and you don't realize what a healthy love looks like, so you just kind of take it, because your system, your brain, your neurological system cannot accept that would happen again. So I can't lose someone again, so I'm just going to stay. And we in trauma bonded relationships, we also have to look at people's sense of self, their sense of their self-worth. Where is their confidence? And often children who've been through a lot of trauma, they have deficits in those areas. It's not their fault, but when children go through a lot of traumatizing events as a child, or they're around a lot of fighting, or their lives are made very unstable because the parents are unstable, the cycle just goes on and on and on. And so of course that's how we're going to behave in a romantic relationship, or really in any relationship at all. So you could say that abusive relationships, mentally abusive, physically, verbally, whatever, you could say that abusive relationships are trauma bond relationships. And I think that would largely be accurate. I think trauma bonding was like a new framework to look at abusive relationships, and an excellent framework at that, because I think it has us look at these relationships with a lot less judgment. So rather than, screaming to the world, I've been in abusive relationships my whole life, or going for help and saying, having shame about being in this kind of relationship, or having shame about sharing what's actually going on in the relationship with people because in your heart it isn't right. When we call it a trauma bond, it feels less judgy than abusive relationship, or I'm being abused. Nobody likes to say I was abused, or I'm a victim of abuse, although there are some people who do like that, attention seekers who do enjoy that. But it's a framework. A trauma bond is a framework, and it's an important one. So if you're resonating with what I'm saying, and you're in this rocky, bumpy roller coaster of a relationship with, I've seen, with addicts, with addiction, with cheating, with, silent treatments, and cutting each other off, and disappearing, and arguing and screaming. And if you're in if that's your norm, you're definitely in a trauma bond. And I'm so glad you're here, because the more we learn about this, the more we can change it. The more we understand the pattern, the more we can do about it, and the more empowered we feel. So I think it's a wonderful thing for you guys to be here to talk about this and get a good understanding. Am I in a trauma bond or not, or what is it? And I think that it's thrown around in the pop culture very incorrectly. I also think that if you have a good screaming match with your significant other now and then, it doesn't mean you're in a trauma bond. It just means you're living, right? And when you're living in such close proximity and in such close emotional ties with another person, of course, you're going to argue and you're going to fight. But the healthier couples really do have integrity, and this is a key word, okay? They really have integrity about their behavior, and they have integrity about how they treat their partners and how their partners feel. So that integrity draws them to sit down and talk and work things out. It's not about being perfect. A healthy relationship, there is no such thing as a perfect relationship. So it's not about that. It's about having this emotional integrity for your partner, yourself, and the relationship as a whole. And in trauma bonds relationships, that integrity is usually it's missing. And even if you're not the antagonist in the relationship, so let's say you're in an abusive relationship and you're not the abuser, okay? You're the receiver, you're the victim, or you think you're in a victim role, which sometimes is not always the case. But okay, I never do this to them. I'm always nice. I'm not the abuser, but yeah, you're in a relationship where you're being abused mentally, verbally, physically, what have you. The fact that you're still there is feeding into it. Really, you're feeding into it. So it's important to be able to take that step back And this isn't judgy, this is about judging, but this is just about taking a step back, recognizing the dynamic in a relationship, and making a decision to look into this. So if you come to me for therapy, somebody asked me a great question today. They said, is it possible that a trauma bonded relationship can be saved or can be helped? And emphatically, yes. If both people in the relationship are willing to come to the table and say, Elizabeth, this is our pattern, this is what's going on, this is how we've been treating each other, we both have lots and lots of traumas from past relationships and past childhood, whatever, and they're both ready to get honest and get help and resolve their traumas, absolutely that couple can be helped. I've helped many couples through that. But it takes two. You can't have one person in a trauma bonded relationship do all the work and not the other person. What you can do is remove yourself from the relationship. What you can do is learn how to set better boundaries. But when you're in a trauma bonded relationship, even if you're in the victim role or you're in the non-antagonist role, you're still fearful. You're still afraid of loss. You're still afraid of neglect, emotional neglect. You might be afraid of financial responsibility. You might be afraid because you have children. You might be afraid because of your families. I mean, there's millions of things that could be trauma bonding us and tethering us to a relationship that's not healthy. And it's always fear. Underneath everything is fear. And fear of what? That can be a menu of things. So if you're the person in the trauma bonded relationship that feels like they're being abused or mistreated, and there's no chance that their partner is even interested in owning up to what's going on, then you definitely want to talk to me about just, what's my next logical step? What is it that I do? And the next logical step is usually working on yourself and getting yourself fit and strong and in the best place that you can in order to make the best decisions for yourself. So I think there's always hope for a person who's really willing to take a look at the dynamic and make a change. So whether you are the antagonist or the receiver or whatever, there's always hope if you're willing to go to therapy. There's always hope. So I think that we'll continue this conversation in different formats. You have to you have to make sure, please, that you like and subscribe this video and share it with people, and we get more and more followers and more shares, because Uplift Me is a healing movement. We are out there trying to heal as many people as we can, and that's only going to happen by you guys helping me get out there. And of course, by me putting myself out there. So make sure you like and subscribe. Make sure that you are following me on Facebook and following me on Instagram, so you see my daily uplifting little clips that I put on for you guys to think about and reflect upon. And there's always something going on. I also do emotional energy healing. And I think for a trauma bond, if you are a trauma bonded individual, I would work on your whole energy field, but I would certainly work on clearing your heart of fear and hurt, because the heart is the most affected energy, one of the most affected energy centers in a trauma bond, as is the lower chakras, which make us feel safe, right? When we're rooted to the earth, our root chakra is our energy center that connects us to the earth. And when we're in a relationship that's trauma bonded and unstable and rocky, we're not going to feel very grounded or very rooted in our lives. So emotional energy healing can really help reconnect you to the amazing, beautiful being that you really are, and can help reconnect you to the world around you in a way that's healthy, and that you learn how to get your own needs met, not by demanding it, not by screaming for it, but by choosing a partner who has the capacity and the capability of automatically and naturally giving and receiving equally with you. So on that note, I thank you guys for watching. You've just been uplifted. Make sure you like, share, follow, and subscribe. And until next week, live at 6 o'clock, I will see you somewhere out there in the ethers. And if you'd like to set up an appointment, just contact me through social media, email me, call me, leave a message, and we will get you scheduled. www.upliftmeliz.com. Take care, everybody, and have a great night.